If you want to understand how global power actually works, you have to look at what fuels it. China's massive industrial machine, the factories, the logistics networks, the cities, requires a staggering, constant supply of energy. To keep those lights on, Beijing relies heavily on a continuous flow of crude oil, pumped straight from the Middle East. This map shows the exact route keeping that economy alive. The United States military abandoned its passive watch in the strait. They were now actively hunting down sanctioned oil ships in the middle of the open ocean. This single landing signaled a shift in strategy. By seizing a tanker deep in the Indian Ocean, the U.S. demonstrated that these maritime networks are now vulnerable to boarding operations anywhere in the world, well beyond the narrow confines of the Persian Gulf. Back in the Strait of Hormuz, the situation for China is even worse. The U.S. has built a literal wall of steel in the water, locking down the area with more than 15 warships and over 10,000 troops. But an aircraft carrier alone doesn't stop smuggling. To catch ghost ships trying to sneak through, the Navy wove a flawless digital nervous system across the entire region, monitoring every floating element above and below the surface. Up in the sky, P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol planes run constant laps around the airspace. They instantly relay surface movement to the U.S. Command Center. Higher still, MQ-4C Triton drones scan the ocean from thousands of meters up. Their thermal tracking network detects even the slightest heat source from a ship's engine, spotting smugglers before they even leave port. In response, massive Chinese-linked oil tankers entered a desperate game of cat and mouse. They tried hiding in the dark, turning off their standard signaling devices, called transponders, hoping to slip past the blockade unnoticed. Overwhelming, multi-layered military surveillance turns a geographic choke point into an inescapable trap. Traditional smuggling tactics completely fall apart when the ocean itself is wired to watch you. Take the Chinese-linked tanker Rich Starry. Carrying 250,000 barrels of chemical cargo, the captain tried to glide silently off the UAE coast under the cover of night, banking on finding a blind spot in American radar. He didn't find one. The USS Spruance, a guided missile destroyer, immediately cut off its route. The American officers didn't fire a single weapon. They simply issued a cold, direct warning over military radio frequencies, implying a direct strike if the tanker didn't stop. Within minutes, the massive ship made a dramatic, humiliating U-turn back toward Iran. This sea-level blockade triggered an immediate disaster on land. Karg Island, the legendary deep-water terminal that handles 90
storage tanks filled to the absolute brim, and the pressure inside the country's pipeline network spiked to critical, dangerous levels. The strain broke local alliances. In a stunning move, the Iranian regime actually blocked a Chinese vessel, the Sun Prophet, from passing through the strait, publicly stating they wouldn't grant blanket approval to their closest economic ally. Severing a maritime choke point pushes the damage inland. It paralyzes the cash flow of an export-based nation and fractures the geopolitical alliances those exports were meant to secure. This chart contrasts the size of China's domestic military with its presence in the waters that matter. While Beijing maintains a massive force at home, its regional naval assets consist of only a few frigates and logistics ships stationed in Djibouti. This exposes the brutal math of power projection. To break the blockade, those few Chinese ships must engage the entire American armada. For Beijing's admirals, making that move would be tactical suicide. With its hands tied, China is forced into a corner. Independent refineries are struggling. The government is desperately draining its strategic petroleum reserves, and their only retaliation is issuing diplomatic complaints in the halls of the United Nations. A massive domestic army remains localized without the global naval power projection necessary to reach across the ocean and protect vital supply lines. And here is where the story pivots. With millions of barrels of Iranian oil suddenly wiped off the market, a massive void opened up in the global supply, causing prices to climb rapidly. Right at that moment, the American energy sector stepped in to fill the gap. While Iranian ports sat dead quiet, ports along the coasts of Texas and Louisiana began operating relentlessly, 24/7. This map tracks the immediate shift in global traffic. Hundreds of massive supertankers, fleeing the high-risk waters of the Middle East, rapidly diverted their course to converge directly on the United States. In April alone, more than 70 massive crude carriers scheduled entries into American ports. Every single one turned into a massive influx of cash. Washington pushed oil exports to record-breaking levels, earning billions in new revenue almost overnight. Controlling these supply chains allowed Washington to simultaneously restrict a rival's energy access and redirect that global demand toward American ports. But there's one final player pulling massive profits out of this chaos: Iran's closest ally on paper, Russia. Instead of breaking the naval blockade to rescue Tehran, Moscow looked at the climbing global oil prices and turned on its own pumps. They used the crisis to sell Siberian oil at a premium to a desperate Chinese market. In just 1 month, Russia's oil revenues doubled. They secured an extra $19 billion from this turmoil, a massive capital flow that poured directly into financing the Kremlin's war machine. Now, unable to secure energy from the Middle East, Beijing is forced to look north, becoming entirely dependent on Russia's safe, icy shipping lanes. Beijing's energy security now rests on the calculation of its northern neighbor rather than its allies in the Gulf. In this environment, the nation capable of policing the global oceans remains the final arbiter of which economies are allowed to grow and which are left to stall.